Hello, everyone. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Chris Collier. I am the Executive Director of Renew Theaters and really excited to have you here for this, our monthly classic film talk with Hannah Jack in this virtual discussion space. I want to welcome back everyone, especially our longtime attendees who have been participating in all of the films in this series, but also welcome those of you who are joining us for the first time. Thank you for joining us, and I hope you enjoy the conversation. As always, this program is sponsored by the Vesta Fund, and that sponsorship allows us to make this program free to our members. So a big thank you to the Vesta Fund for that support, and also a huge thank you to all of our members, especially those who are attending tonight. Your support is what makes everything at the theater possible and has seen us through this past year and allowed us to reopen. I hope that many of you were able to see this film back up on the big screen. We were happy to have offered it at a couple locations over the past couple weeks. So that is something that we are planning to do as we go forward. So Renew Theaters operates the Ambler County, Princeton Garden, and Highway theaters. So it's really exciting to have this virtual format in which we can invite members from all of our different communities together. But I also see some of you who are outside of the Philadelphia area, and it's really great to have you here. And that's one of the really exciting things about doing this virtually, is we can have a large audience, not just limited to one geographical space. And that's my segue into the exciting news about the series. The Vesta Fund has been really thrilled by the growth of this program, especially in the virtual space, and has asked us to expand the series and find ways to reach new audiences, and has given us an additional grant to do so. So I'm really excited that starting this fall, we are looking to have this series incorporate more speakers, more events, and actually what's really fun is it's going to incorporate some additional theaters, not just those four from Renew.
Oh, God.
I'm sorry.
One note that I would like to share is the first theater that we're going to be working with is the Majestic Theater from Gettysburg. So I can see Jeffrey Gables here from the Majestic. I'd just like to say hi and welcome him. Jeffrey will be helping to source some speakers from Gettysburg College and from the Gettysburg area, as well as doing a Film 101 on a Hollywood classic in the upcoming months. So you will definitely see him again. We're really excited for that partnership and expanding this series out into central Pennsylvania and to have speakers from there as well. Anything you'd like to say, Jeffrey, or just along for the ride?
Yes, hello, everyone. Thank you for the warm welcome and greeting, Chris. The Gettysburg College's 1925 historic Majestic Theater is thrilled to be part of this expanding group on Film 101. The Majestic has an aggressive and interesting daily film program with 2 cinemas showing first-run films and independent films. And then we also have an historic 25 800-seat historic film, historic auditorium, excuse me, where we show classic films every Wednesday night in the historic theater that often draws 200 to 300 people that enjoy looking at the classic films. So we're thrilled to be part of this expanding group. Thank you for the warm welcome.
Great. The other person that I wanted to introduce is Julia Mahoney. Julia has been with us at Renew for a number of years, but will be taking on a new role and helping us to bring programs, to develop programs, and to administer the growth of this. So we're really excited to have Julia as part of this Growing Film 101 program, and you will definitely see her face in the future as she might be doing these introductions as well. Would you like to just say hello, Julia?
Hello, everyone. I'm excited to bring you more of what you're already loving here and maybe some new programs as well. So really excited to see where this goes.
Great. So we've been working hard in thinking about what this is going to look like with this expanded program. Of course, Hannah will be continuing her series throughout the rest of the year and hopefully beyond that. But we are, as I said, looking to add additional tracks, just a hint of what is to come. We will be adding some more classics, but we're also looking to add a series on international films and partnering with an Iranian filmmaker at Temple University who's going to help us with that series, as well as a series on Asian American perspectives from Ann Chang at Princeton University. And we've got some other great programs in the works, so stay tuned. Of course, the next two films on the schedule are with Hannah, and those will be High Society on August 10th and Witness for the Prosecution on September 14th. So make sure you have those dates circled on your calendar because they are going to be wonderful discussions. And if you happen to have missed one, we do now have all of the recordings of all of the past presentations and these discussions on our website. So you can always loop back and catch up and watch one. All right, I think that is all of my news, and we're ready to dive into things. As always, here are the quick Zoom protocols. We ask everyone to please remain on mute unless you are speaking. Hannah's going to start with a little overview of the film, and then we'll open it up to questions. I will be moderating the conversation, so if you have a question, we'll start with please use the raise hand feature, and I will call on everyone, and then normally by the end, we end up just relaxing everything and everyone can jump in and talk. But we'll at least start with that level of decorum. Again, thank you all for joining us tonight. It is my pleasure once again to turn things over to Hannah Jack, who's a writer for Turner Classic Movies. We are thrilled to have her leading us through this classic series and back where we started with Hitchcock. Hannah, it's all yours.
Great. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much, Chris. It's also exciting to hear about, and I look forward to continuing this series and participating in the other talks too. So as Chris said, next month will be the 1956 musical High Society. Can everyone hear me okay? We're all good? Okay, good. So I just wanted to inadvertently, we have a Grace Kelly double feature, so we will be talking at length about her more next time. But the reason why I wasn't able to disclose this last time when we announced High Society, I can now since TCM has announced it. I know we have a lot of Turner Classic Movies fans who attend these talks. The reason why I had chosen High Society for August is because if you watch Turner Classic Movies year after year, you probably know that August is a celebration called Summer Under the Stars, where the whole month TCM dedicates every day of August to a different Hollywood star. So you get to do a deep dive into their work. And each year there are obviously the stars who are big names who return year after year. There's always, you know, the Betty Davis Day or whatever. But every year TCM tries to also include some stars who've never gotten a 24-hour tribute. And this year, one of those stars is Louis Armstrong. So there will be an entire day of movies featuring Louis Armstrong, one of which is High Society. I've written the introductions to a lot of the movies that are airing in Summer Under the Stars, including Louis Armstrong Day. So that is why, also because we haven't talked about a musical yet, I thought that would be fun. It's totally by coincidence that Grace Kelly's in both of them. If you don't know High Society at all, it's a remake of the Philadelphia Story, but it's a musical remake. And in that Philadelphia Story starring Jimmy Stewart, the remake featuring Grace Kelly and Bing Crosby and Frank Sinatra and Louis Armstrong. So definitely check that out for next month. But in the meantime, let's talk about this month's movie, which is a far cry from High Society, Rear Window. And I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen with you, as always, to give you some images as we talk. So we should all see a picture of Jimmy Stewart now, yes? Great. So I had the great pleasure of seeing this movie in the new huge auditorium at the County Theater, which was incredible. And I can't recommend seeing this movie on the big screen or going to that new space enough. And I think that seeing it on the big screen this time kind of drove home for me the fact that this is really the perfect movie for the weather that we've been having lately. I don't think I ever really felt the like heat wave element of it so much as seeing it just now. But it's definitely one of those movies where there's so much to say about the making of the movie, and there's also so much to say about the content of the movie. So I'm gonna I'm gonna go into, in my talk, kind of behind the scenes info about the making of the movie. But I hope and I'm sure that in our open discussion, we'll talk more about your interpretations. There's so much to talk about like what goes on within the movie itself. So, as Chris said, we left Hitchcock back in January. If you've been joining us month after month, we began the year with a Hitchcock two-part discussion about his career in England, which was the first chapter of his career, where he was born and where he began making movies. And we left him in 1938 with The Lady Vanishes, which is that image that you see on the left-hand side there, a younger Alfred Hitchcock, very eager to move to Hollywood, which he did very shortly thereafter. And he made his debut in 1946 in Hollywood with the movie Rebecca. And so this is in 1940, he makes his first Hollywood film. He would remain in Hollywood for the rest of his career. And so fast forward 14 years, 1954 is where we're picking up with him with Rear Window. And in the meantime, he established himself really as one of the most popular, commercially popular directors in Hollywood, with a lot of hits, and some obviously that weren't hits, but here are some of them. At this point, by the time he made Rear Window, he had racked up 3 Oscar nominations for Best Director for Rebecca, Lifeboat, and Spellbound. And he'd also already directed some of his other best movies like Shadow of a Doubt, Notorious, Strangers on a Train. So this is all stuff Hitchcock had been doing in Hollywood since we last saw him and before Rear Window. But Rear Window really marked an important turning point in Hitchcock's career. It was the start of a new contract that he signed with Paramount Pictures, which gave him more money in terms of his salary and in terms of his movie budgets, more flexibility with time, some of the best creative collaborators he ever worked with, and the ability to work with really top stars, because unlike Warner Brothers, had no qualms about paying for any stars Hitchcock wanted. So he really was finally in a place where his creative ambitions matched the resources that he was requiring. And that started with Rear Window. And it was a movie that began what would become the most creatively vibrant period of his career. If you think about the movies he made over the next decade, beginning with Rear Window and going into 1960s, these are the movies that everyone thinks of when they think of a Hitchcock movie. Movies like Rear Window, Vertigo, North by Northwest, Psycho, The Birds. This is this chapter of his career that really begins with Rear Window. And his daughter, Pat Hitchcock, who's a wonderful sense of humor, said that Rear Window really was Hitchcock 101. She said you have all the elements that he loved: the anti-hero, the cool blonde, the humor, the grisly murder, a love story, and dialogue about food. And so this was really a movie that brought together so much of what excited Hitchcock. So how this movie, the story originated was from a short story by Cornell Woolrich, who wrote a lot of pulp thrillers that were often adapted for the radio and for the big screen. Over there on the left-hand side, you can see it appeared, in just magazines. And the rights to this story weren't picked up by Hitchcock originally. Originally, they were in the hands of a director named Joshua Logan. If that name sounds familiar, he was a very, very prominent Broadway director who made a couple of really terrific movies, including Picnic, which you see on the right there with William Holden, Joshua Logan first got his hands on this murder mystery and wanted to make a movie out of it. Not the kind of movie we associate with him so much, but he took a stab at adapting it. And a lot of the things that we see, it kind of took some steps toward what we see in the final product. Josh Logan's script took this original story. The character of Jeffries did not have any kind of stated profession. Josh Logan made him a sports writer. It was Hitchcock who decided to keep the fact that he has a career that's important to the plot, but he had the master stroke of genius to make him a photojournalist. And of course, we can talk a lot about how his career and the lens and the voyeurism is so central to this movie. Josh Logan also added the character of the girlfriend, not in the original story. He had her as an actress. Hitchcock turned her into a fashion model. But so much of what we see in the story as we see it in the movie was Hitchcock's invention. Many of the characters, almost all of the neighbors, the Thorwalds were in the original story, but all these other interesting characters who we can certainly talk about were invented by Hitchcock. And he was working with a writer who would become one of his most successful collaborators, a man named John Michael Hayes, you see there with him in the middle. And they went on to write Hitchcock's next 3 movies together, To Catch a Thief, The Trouble with Harry, and The Man Who Knew Too Much. What was interesting to Hitchcock about Rear Window specifically was the opportunity to tell a story that what he called purely cinematic. So he worked with a writer who was an expert dialogue writer, but the dialogue was not what Hitchcock wanted to focus on. He wanted to be able to tell a story that would be told almost exclusively by the camera and very, very little by the words. And he relied on something, he was very excited by a technical challenge, and he relied on something that was a technique developed in the silent era called montage editing, which is where you see something and the way that the images are edited together is what gives you the meaning in the story. So I'll explain this. You basically see the character, Jimmy Stewart, and then you cut to an image of what he's looking at. And then you cut back to him to see his reaction. And the way that those images are woven together is what tells the story with no words. So this is how Hitchcock created so much of this film. And he was fascinated by the idea that you could substitute in anything that he's looking at and give a different meaning. So for instance, with this technique, if you saw a character looking kind of sad, and then you see that he's looking at a coffin, for instance, and then you look back at him and he looks very sad, you would think he's in mourning. Your mind would fill in the gaps and tell the story. But then if you see the same exact expression on that person's face, but instead they're looking, through a window at a party or something, or a banquet, and then you look back at them, you might think, oh, they're feeling left out or something else. So he was really interested in being able to tell a story that was entirely told through images, and how he could manipulate what the audience thought and felt just by manipulating the images. And remember that Hitchcock, we talked about this in January, started out directing in the silent era, where there was no dialogue. So this is what he loved most. He also really loved the idea of making a movie that was set in one confined space. He had done this before with the movie Lifeboat, which was set entirely on a lifeboat. And if you think about Rear Window, we don't even go into other rooms in Jimmy Stewart's apartment. This is just one room where the whole movie takes place in. And you could see Hitchcock on the set there placed himself in that space. He was the whole time directing from that room. And there's only one time where we really kind of step out of Jimmy Stewart's window in the whole film. And that's when the dog is killed. And there's a whole hue and cry in the neighborhood, and everyone comes to their windows. And we suddenly start to see perspectives that aren't Jimmy Stewart's, but the rest of the movie is just from his window, from his little world there. So that technical challenge excited him too. From the beginning, he only ever planned this movie for its 2 stars, Grace Kelly and Jimmy Stewart. Nobody else was ever considered for these roles. Jimmy Stewart had previously starred in one other Hitchcock movie, Rope, from 1948. There are only two men who ever starred in 4 Hitchcock movies, and that's Cary Grant and Jimmy Stewart. Those were his 2 favorite leading men. Jimmy Stewart went on to make the remake of The Man Who Knew Too Much and also Vertigo. And was at a point in his career, if you think about early Jimmy Stewart in the 1930s with movies like Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, he had a very bright-eyed, bushy-tailed, naive, kind of young vibe. He went off and served in World War II and came back a much more mature guy and reinvented himself on screen. He started playing much darker characters, and a lot of that has to do with the movies he made with Hitchcock. And then, of course, Grace Kelly, who we can talk a lot about her status as kind of the Hitchcock blonde. She was one of Hitchcock's favorite people to work with, and she had just made their last movie together, Dial M for Murder, was the movie they both made right before this. And Hitchcock knew during that production that he was going to be making Rear Window, and at every opportunity talked to her about that movie. They were planning it, even before she was really cast, they were planning it together, and she was very much in his mind as they were making this movie. He had his screenwriter tailor this part to her specifically. And like I said, we'll talk more about Grace Kelly's career, but she had only made a handful of films by the time she made this one. She had a very short career, but this was really early on. And they would go on to make their next movie together, To Catch a Thief, as well. And then in the supporting cast, you have a lot of really great character actors here. You've got Wendell Corey as the Lieutenant Doyle. That was a character who was incidentally in the original story, but very minor. He was much more built up for this movie. Then you've got Thelma Ritter, who we talked about a bit when we talked about Pillow Talk a couple months ago. She also a character who was invented by Hitchcock in order to add some comedy to the movie. And nobody could deliver these kinds of sordid wisecracks like Thelma Ritter. And her career in movies really only began a couple years before this. She entered films when she was quite a bit older than most. 4 Oscar nominations under her belt. So she was really a terrific supporting actress. And then you've got Raymond Burr as Thorwald. And this was just a few years shy of his TV fame as Perry Mason, but he was a terrific inside joke on Hitchcock's part, was to make Raymond Burr look the way that you see him here. Hitchcock deliberately aged him with gray hair, curled his hair, put these glasses on him to evoke a particular man in Hollywood, producer David O. Selznick. He was supposed to specifically look like Selznick. Selznick was the man who brought Hitchcock to Hollywood, but they had a very contentious relationship. And this was Hitchcock's none too subtle dig at his former boss to make him the murderer in this movie. And like I said before, during this film, Hitchcock got to work with some of the collaborators who would be the most creatively rewarding in his career. So I'll just mention a few of those. One of them was his favorite cinematographer, Robert Burks, who's there on the left with him. He made 12 movies with Hitchcock, starting with Strangers on a Train, going all the way through Marnie. The only one that Robert Burks did not shoot in that time period was Psycho. But if you think about all of the other camera work he did for movies like The Birds and Vertigo and North by Northwest, he was really a great collaborator to achieve Hitchcock's vision. In the middle is the editor, George Tomasini. I mentioned that the editing in this movie was really important for Hitchcock, and he went on to make 9 more movies with him, earned an Oscar nomination for editing North by Northwest. And then, of course, all the way on the right-hand side there, if you're a fan of Golden Age Hollywood, and you know one costume designer, you probably know Edith Head. She's all the way there on the right-hand side. She designed the costumes. The costumes were key in this movie and in so many of Hitchcock's movies. In his mind, so much of the storytelling was rooted in the costumes. They had previously worked together only on one movie, Notorious, and she was under contract at Paramount, so they finally got to work together again. And she would go on to oversee the costumes on all of his movies until the end of his career. Side note about Edith Head, she, in the course of her unbelievable career, was nominated for 34 Oscars. She won 8 times, and that makes her the most honored costume designer and the most honored woman in Academy Awards history. So she's really kind of an important figure in Hollywood history, period. And then just a final note, Rear Window was a huge hit, not just looked at now as a wonderful film, but in its time, and earned 4 Oscar nominations, again for Hitchcock as Best Director, for its screenplay, cinematography, and for its sound recording, which is another incredible thing that we can talk about too. Weirdly, not for that incredible set that we certainly can also discuss. That was a major oversight, but that set construction was really spectacular and took over the whole of Paramount Studios. So that's all I'm going to say up front. I know there's a lot to say about this movie, so I would love to hear your thoughts. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and let's open it up for discussion.
Nothing? Grant.
Can you talk about like the voyeurism that goes on? Like I know it's something that Hitchcock has like done like other things, especially with like Vertigo, like the following and just watching. I don't know if it's like throughout his career. I just want to see if you could talk about that.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly can. I'd love to hear what you guys think too. The idea of, he called this his ultimate peeping Tom movie, and the Hitchcock himself was obviously a voyeur and very, very interested in seeing what kind of trouble other people were getting into, or kind of like illicit things people were doing. But he, of course, is also making a commentary on the experience of watching a movie. We are all complicit in watching, we're all as curious. We're all looking at the lives of these people in the same way. But what did you guys all think of that? Because that's so central to this movie. Don't be shy. There's a lot to say about this movie.
Well, I mean, just, commenting on that. Oh, no, go ahead.
I just wanted to say it was, I felt like we were watching somebody watching us, watching them. And it was, really, it's just an extraordinary film. I had seen it a couple of times before, and we watched it again last night. And there's just so much, it's just such a rich film. I'm so glad you suggested this. So thank you.
Thanks, Anne. Tom, back to you.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot to talk about in this film for sure. But certainly the ethics of of what he's doing, is just always there at the forefront. I mean, when he, it's one thing to say, oh, well, he kind of figures out a murder, so you're kind of on his side. But, he's pulling out his camera and watching all his neighbors, and it's, when you think about that, it's pretty uncomfortable. It's really, it is not something anybody around him is thinking, oh, somebody's looking at me. And it's not something that, generally, if you knew somebody was doing that, you wouldn't be real comfortable with it.
Yeah, it's funny you say that, because Hitchcock commented that when Thorwald comes in and starts attacking Jeff, he said he deserved it. That's what, he got what he deserved.
Cynthia?
Yes, my comment was, it's always disturbed me about this movie that even when he could see his girlfriend being attacked and in trouble across the way in the other apartment, he couldn't get past his voyeurism enough to just shout out the window and let Raymond Burr character know that he was being watched.
Yeah, it's a great point. I haven't thought about that, but yeah.
So is it just that he was in the habit of just watching and not participating, and he couldn't get past that to help her somehow?
Yeah, I mean, I've always sort of read that moment as him being afraid to kind of endanger her further or endanger himself, but he is immobilized. That's the whole, premise, is that he cannot, he doesn't have like free reign of it. And I think that there is a certain extent to which he just is a prisoner of his, little bubble there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
We've got a queue here, so we're going to go Polly, Risa, and then Jeffrey. So Polly first.
Yeah, I think with the voyeurism, the relationship he has with Lisa or whatever, however they're pronouncing that, is really intertwined with that issue, because he's at the beginning, he's not really engaging in their relationship. He's kind of like watching her as this beautiful, object sort of, and not really participating. And he kind of goes on this long rant about it's not going to work, she's too perfect. But then when she sort of says, well, that's disappointing and I'm in love with you, but I guess it's over, he's like, no, come back, so he's participating, but not participating in the same way as a voyeur does, and when he's watching out the rear window.
Yeah, exactly. Yes, absolutely. He very much, I mean, that's also where Hitchcock's masterstroke of making him this photojournalist. It's not only something that enabled him to use the props of a camera, at strategic moments in the film, but it also, sets him up as a character who lives his life by looking through a lens. That's what he's used to. Of course, the one time he put himself right in the center of the action, he got into a major accident. So there's this other layer of him, towing the line between participating and just watching through a camera. Makes this movie studied far and wide in film courses and in, literature courses too.
Risa?
Yes. So what I found interesting about the voyeurism is all the windows were open. Everyone was watching everyone else, I think. But it's sort of interesting to see the times at which they closed the windows, they shut the shades, and you really want to know more, like when Miss Lonely Hearts, was that her name?
Mm-hmm.
Would close the screen, and obviously she was becoming very depressed and potentially suicidal. And so it was kind of interesting, the interplay with the shades being closed by the newly married couple. And, it wasn't that the windows were open all the time. So I thought it was just an interesting conceit that he had there.
Absolutely. And again, something that is not done with dialogue. It's just done with the visual of what it tells us about the people at these different moments, that their shades are open or they're closed. The whole movie opens with the opening of the shades, the curtain is rising. And then we get to look in. We don't look into Jeff's window, but we're in that space. Almost as if it's inviting us to look in by raising the curtain at the very beginning. But yeah, I should note that that set, because it's we're going to talk about those neighbors over and over again. That set was built on the biggest soundstage at Paramount. The entire basement was kind of opened up to make for the first floor of the courtyard, and 31 full-size apartments were constructed. 12 of them were fully furnished. They used every piece of lighting equipment that Paramount had, and borrowed more from 2 other studios. And at one point, the lights set off the sprinklers because there was too much, and Hitchcock just kind of asked for an umbrella and asked them to tell him when the rain was going to stop. It was just an unbelievable undertaking. And like I said, Hitchcock was in Jimmy Stewart's apartment. That's where he planted himself. So in order to get the lights to do the right thing, they all had to be hooked up to switches all over the place that he had to talk to. And then also to direct the actors across the way. I mean, you may have heard about this. There are a lot of great anecdotes. All the actors who were the neighbors had earpieces in, and Hitchcock fed them directions that often Jimmy Stewart didn't hear. So he would tell the actor over there, he would, quietly tell them to do something. They would do it, and then he would capture Jimmy Stewart's authentic reaction to something he didn't know was happening. So in that moment, for instance, where the couple with the dog, it starts to rain and they have to go into the window, he told the husband to turn off his earpiece, gave the wife a direction about where to pull the mattress, then told the wife to turn off her earpiece, gave the husband a direction about where to pull, and then he said action, and they both started pulling because they didn't know what he had said to the other one. So there was a lot that he was kind of puppet mastering behind the scenes in that soundstage too.
Jeffrey?
I wonder, and I'm not a psychiatrist, if the voyeurism of Stewart's character is actually a manifestation of his sexual impotency, which is also underlined by the huge cast that he is encumbered by.
Yeah.
And particularly as the movie goes on and he gets more and more intensely emotionally interested in what's happening with all these characters. It's almost of a sexual nature, possibly.
100%. And that's Hitchcock's bread and butter. He absolutely loved tapping into the sexual frustrations of his characters. Definitely, you're reading the right thing into that. Yeah.
We have a comment that came in through the chat that kind of relates to this and relates to Hitchcock's battles with the censors over the years. So this is, was there any argument that Hitchcock had to have with the censors regarding Lisa's plan to stay overnight? Do you know any issues with censors in this film?
Yes, there are many things. He wrote a laundry list of objections, not just her plans to stay overnight, Miss Torso dropping her bra, Thelma Ritter's character saying all kinds of disgusting things about murder. There's a lot that there was really truly a list of things that they wanted cut. Fortuitously, Joseph Breen was about to retire. So nobody really enforced his list of objections because the timing just worked out so that he was out of office, and the new, his replacement was able to kind of read the room and understand that times were beginning to change, and that Hitchcock was not really doing anything that was, intensely provocative, just sort of slightly provocative. Hitchcock also had an unbelievable streak with getting around the production code. So he often, if you look through his movies, he often just knew how to do it so that he could get past it. But that's why so many of those things that for 1954 were a little bit like that. That's why the timing just worked out well.
David?
I had a question about, or an observation about one of the scenes towards the end of the movie that, Hannah, maybe you know something about, or if anybody else noticed it like I did, but it had to do with the songwriter across the way, who himself was a very interesting character. You probably have more to say about him. But during the latter part of the movie, Jimmy Stewart and Grace Kelly were talking about, all these murderous plans and things like this. And there was this party going on across the way. And it was really loud, at least to me. It was intrusive. And I'm wondering if he had any, I don't know what it would have been, but if he had any reason for doing that.
For including the party?
For making it so in your face, even though we didn't see it. It was just like really there, really loud, while they're talking about all of these murderous things.
Yeah, it's such a great thing that you brought up that character, because that was a point of one thing Hitchcock did not love about this movie. He thought that he did a really good job, rightly so. He felt like he was on point with a lot of things in this movie. He did not like the way that the story arc of the songwriter played out. And he blamed that on the film's composer, Franz Waxman, because what he wanted to do was tell a story of a man who was really struggling to write a song. And he wanted that to kind of build so that you saw a neighbor who was really, we can talk more about this, but all of the neighbors kind of feed into these other themes. So there's this artist who's trying to like live out his artistic passion, who's struggling with that, very much like Jimmy Stewart's character is. It's like a parallel there. But he wanted this character to, the first time he plays the song, have it be like he's really struggling to write this. And then he comes home drunk one night because he's really having a hard time. And then finally, it needed to build much more to this point where his final, orchestrated recording comes out and opens up a new chapter in his life. And the party included was supposed to fit into his arc of like entertaining, people with this song that he's got and making that next step of his career. And it just didn't work because what Franz Waxman did was he composed a finished song from the beginning. So the very first time that the guy sits down to play the music, you hear that it's in its full version. So that character's story the reason why it doesn't really read is because it didn't really read. And Hitchcock knew that, and he was frustrated with that. But the party itself, the noise that comes from that also speaks to the way that the sound recording was done. I mentioned that the sound recording was nominated for an Oscar. All of the sound in the movie, with only a few exceptions, comes from the natural sounds in the city. So what you hear is the city noise, you hear the party that all bursts into that apartment, you hear the horns, you hear all the different things that are going on. Very, very few moments where there's any orchestrated music being played like a traditional movie score. So that was also part of that too.
Thank you. Daniel?
Yeah, thanks so much. I just had an observation that I wanted to share, and I don't know if there's much to it, but I just figured something just occurred to me as I'm watching this or watching Rear Window, and the different kind of contained sets. They all contain specific like different stories, and I guess I was trying to research, but I don't know if there was anything to, I guess I noticed a rise in like television sets in the 50s and things like that, to that effect, in just thinking about people being able to watch all these things in the safeness of their spaces. And I guess just the title of the film, Rear Window, to me signals, it seems almost like a play in a way, and it seems almost like a transition to different mediums and more kind of more self choice, or so to say, of people, like the voyeurism that is part of entertainment, whether it be theater, movies, or then television, and now even today I think it's continued. But I guess I just wanted to share that as a thought, and I don't know how y'all think about it. So
yeah, I love that, the idea that they're like individual TV dramas playing out. It makes you wonder why he had to look out the window and couldn't just watch TV while he's recuperating. But yeah, right. But yeah, other thoughts about that? Yeah.
Tom?
So yeah, I think that's, sometimes I think, and it struck me, I've seen this movie a number of times. When I was watching it again this time, it struck me that sometimes I think Hitchcock liked to just present himself with problems to solve and do something totally different. And while, I always think of this as a classic Hitchcock film, in many ways it isn't. I mean, you mentioned the sound. You think of all the Bernard Herrmann scores, which are to come, the North by Northwest and Psycho and all these, that are driven by, these great soundtracks that he incorporated. Here you've got virtually no soundtrack at all. You just have the sounds, and it works so incredibly effectively to put you into it. And then the other thing is just, in one way, Stewart is, a classic Hitchcock protagonist, and being thrown into something, and kind of trying to figure it out, and not, whether it's Cary Grant in North by Northwest, but they're all very active. They're all like running, they're going, they're moving. And here he took a protagonist and just, he can't move at all.
Yeah.
And I wonder sometimes if he just kind of said, you know what, I want to do something totally different. I want to do something that'll challenge me. Can I make a film that doesn't have what are these classic elements that he so often relied on?
You hit the nail on the head. That absolutely, that was that in his the bulk of his career, nobody really realized that about Hitchcock. They thought that he just made entertaining movies. And finally, he sat down with Truffaut much later in his career, and had this long, in-depth discussion where Truffaut rightly said, "You're a genius. This is so much of what you've done is so technically innovative." And that interview, which you can see recordings of or script of, it's a great book, kind of opened the world's eyes to the fact that Hitchcock was doing all these incredibly innovative, artistic things all along, and nobody was really, the wiser for it. But I think that I think things that always appealed to him was the idea of a technical challenge and doing something totally different. He did that with Lifeboat, everything on one lifeboat. Rope, like I said, the earlier Jimmy Stewart movie, he wanted to do everything as much to give the appearance of one continuous shot as possible. He was always doing things like this, but it was only recognized much later in his career. And I think, to your other point though, also about the him being immobilized in this plot, it fascinated Hitchcock too that there was this parallel, this beautiful symmetry that we almost don't even notice, where Jimmy Stewart, the protagonist of the movie, is an invalid confined to his wheelchair, being taken care of by his significant other. Across the way, there's an invalid wife who is being taken care of by the murderer. And so there's this unbelievable, parallel. But what is so, I think, such an achievement of Rear Window is that we almost lose sight of all of these technical things. We don't look at it and see, oh, well, that was a technical stunt that we just watched. Like that comes later. It's really couched in this beautifully entertaining story that he's able to tell. But yeah, these are great points that you brought up.
Thank you. Risa?
Yeah, a couple of things. First of all, I think, what's very interesting about all the different windows is that everyone could probably write down what the story is behind each window just from watching the little, snippets that we get. So I thought that was very fascinating. But I think this is a film about love and relationship, and about, in all the different permutations of that, the newlywed couple, the Miss Lonely Hearts, love gone wrong, leading to a murder, love, the struggle between Jimmy Stewart and Grace Kelly, and even the love story with the woman who's flirting with all the guys, and then at the end she's got this, sailor that came home. And I just thought that theme of love and relationship was really significant one in this movie.
It's true. Every one of those stories that we see in the other windows ties into that in some way, some kind of love relationship or artistic love and commitment to your career and your artistic passion. It's funny that you say that, but it's true that you say that this is a movie about love, because when we talked in January about Hitchcock, we talked about the term the MacGuffin, which is the thing that kind of sets the plot in motion, but nobody really cares about. It doesn't like matter in the end. And it's been said that the MacGuffin in this movie is the murder of Mrs. Thorwald, because it does not really matter whether or not where is her body? I mean, who cares? What really matters is, does Jimmy Stewart and Grace Kelly, do they work it out? That's the plot. It's this murder that is just playing a function in the relationship of these two people. That's been a way that this movie's been interpreted.
Remy?
Yeah, you mentioned the movie Rope, which I always think of as sort of a double feature with Rear Window, because they feel like very similar movies and similar commentaries on voyeurism or on, just a capsule story that happens in an apartment. I'm wondering, because Rope was I think 6 or 7 years before Rear Window, and it's also Jimmy Stewart, but I'm wondering if there was any inspiration taken from that by Hitchcock to bring some of that, the storytelling from that into Rear Window, or if there was anything that he didn't like about what he did with Rope and wanted to redo with a different kind of story from a different perspective there.
Yeah, it's great that you connect those. The Rope, if you don't know the movie, it's inspired by the story of Leopold and Loeb, these two friends who, for the pure intellectual challenge of it, murder a friend and try to have a dinner party and hide the fact that the dead body is in the middle of the room. And Hitchcock's, and Jimmy Stewart plays the role of their professor and mentor of these two psychotic boys who comes in and they're trying to impress him. And Rope was based on a stage play. It was taken and just brought to the screen. It was a stage play. Dial M for Murder, as I mentioned just before this, was also a stage play that Hitchcock put in, again, one room. And the thing that Hitchcock wanted to do differently from both of those movies was, like I said before, cut out as much of the chatter, as much of the dialogue as possible. So those two movies that he had previously made just recently were also confined to a single apartment room. And that was a challenge that he undertook. But Rear Window does that with far fewer words. And so that was something that he was trying to do differently. And also what I mentioned before about Rope his effort to make it look like it's one continuous take. He was like, all right, I tried that and that didn't work so well. So he didn't want to do that again. But yeah, that would make a good double feature. Yeah.
Julia?
I was just thinking back to what Daniel said a little bit ago about how everybody is kind of in their own little TV screen. So everybody is pretty much a voyeur here, but I was thinking just like the names of some of the women, like Miss Lonely Hearts or Miss Torso, that the women are particularly watched either in relation to love or in relation to sex appeal, and even Grace Kelly's character as a model. So it seems like Jimmy Stewart is a watcher to the point where he can no longer be like an actor in his life. So I'm wondering if Hitchcock is trying to make a further commentary there about like acting in terms of love rather than just like watching or separating themselves from the people that they love.
Yeah, it's a great point. Hitchcock was not very much trying to make any kind of deeper points often. He was often just trying to tell a really good story in the most interesting possible way. That was kind of his go-to. A lot of what we are reading into this rightly is very much a factor of who Hitchcock was. It's himself putting himself, in his own interests on screen. And so he was absolutely like a lecherous kind of guy who was, famously not, there's a lot of talk about, was he impotent? had a child and he was married and had a long marriage, but a lot of his interest was just in this, like, you know, arousal by looking at all these beautiful women. We talked about Grace Kelly being the Hitchcock, the quintessential Hitchcock blonde. Something that was so appealing about her and her type was the fact that he called it an indirect sexuality. The idea that she appears to be this sophisticated, classy lady, and that was the kind of leading lady. That was the figure that he preferred in movies because he liked the element of surprise. That kiss where she shows up out of the clear blue and is in the dark and wakes him up, like that. The fact that you would never expect, I mean, sure, you'd expect Marilyn Monroe to do that, but like not a Grace Kelly. And so that kind of sex symbol was interesting to him. He didn't think that the movies Marilyn Monroe made were very interesting because, of course, you expected sexualized figure. You didn't expect that as much from a Grace Kelly. So it was just told a better story. And she was definitely game for all the things that he had in mind. She was the kind of, she was gutsy in her own way, and they had a great rapport. And he really, really resented that she went off and became a princess and left Hollywood. We'll talk more about that when we talk about High Society, but yeah.
Now, there is a comment going on in the chat talking about, let me scroll back to Elisa's comment. Did anyone else think that there was a lack of chemistry between the two stars? Now, Hannah, you had highlighted that these were the two that Hitchcock really wanted, but a couple people have commented that there wasn't chemistry between them. Was that, do you think, intentional, playing on the items that Jeffrey brought up, or did they not click?
Oh, they loved each other. They adored each other. Yeah. I always think that there is chemistry between them. It's interesting that you don't think that. I mean, I think I will also say that the buildup of a romantic relationship between two actors on screen was not Hitchcock's forte. If you look at a lot of his movies, the romance is either because the chemistry was just there or that was it. It's often an element of his movies that is not as strong as it is with other directors, because he didn't take the time to kind of work them through, getting to know each other, whatever. It just was, but I don't know. What do you guys think about the chemistry or no chemistry? Barbara, I see your hand. Go ahead.
No, I'm trying to get called on. Well, I think that I agree that the chemistry is kind of mysterious. I don't quite understand why Grace Kelly likes the Jimmy Stewart character. He seems much older than her. I know he's only 20 years older, but he seems like he could be 40 years older to me. And the thing that works though with it is that he seems to be very uncomfortable with her brilliant presence right in the room. But when she's on the other side of the courtyard and he's looking at her in a window, that's when he starts getting excited. The whole voyeuristic, that's when you can see like the sexual attraction.
Yeah.
It almost seems lurid because it seems like it's like a dirty old man looking at someone. But I mean, I know he's not that old. He just seems older in this to me. But yeah. I don't see the chemistry of the two lovers.
Yeah.
Angela?
Okay. To me, it was more of him trying to resist his attraction to her because he didn't want to get tied down, knowing that maybe she couldn't survive in the type of lifestyle that he wanted to live. So he was always pulling back. That's how I saw it. And Grace really did love older men, from what I understand. They held a very strong attraction to her. I had read due to the fact of the coolness of her dad. I don't know if that's true or not, but that's what I heard. And she had a lot of fun with the older men.
She also entered the business very young.
Yes, and
so she was often working with older men.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. But they were fine with her.
Oh,
She was fine with
of course.
that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Holly, I had seen your hand up. Did you have another comment?
Yeah, going back to Hannah's discussion about Hitchcock, and it does seem like he has his working through, whether he was cognizant of it or not, of this voyeurism. I was just thinking about, Vertigo, kind of the masterpiece, and how that, Jimmy Stewart there is really watching and voyeuristically controlling a woman so much that he like recreates this other woman out of the new one. So yeah, and then someone said in the comments, is Jimmy Stewart actually Hitchcock? And whether he knew it or not, I know he didn't write it, but it certainly seems like part of this theme of voyeurism was him working out something deep within himself.
Oh, absolutely. And that comes up in Hitchcock's career over and over again. Things that fascinated him, things that were just were on his mind, things that he thought were interesting, that all came out. And even though he's not credited as the screenwriter, he had a heavy hand in all of his scripts. And certainly dictated every single shot of the film. So all of this is very much, on his brain too. John. Oh, sorry. I just saw.
I was just going to say, we've sort of danced around or mentioned obliquely the thing which on multiple viewings I think is absolutely the best thing about this movie. It's obviously a great script with great editing, the idea of the voyeurism, the way the set is set up. Grace Kelly's dresses are the greatest dresses in the history of movies. Her entrance at the beginning, when we say she kissed Jimmy Stewart as he's waking up, and then she stands back and you see her dress, and each scene in which she's introduced, like the dress gets better and better. And Thelma Ritter talks about Jimmy Stewart's hormonal level not being high as he's been looking out at various people, but I think that's kind of getting at what people are talking about with a lack of chemistry, is that he should be so lucky as to have a woman like this literally throwing herself on top of him. And he says, I'm still thinking about what I saw across the street. And it all does have to do with the idea of that his voyeurism is keeping him from being involved in the action and the romance with her. And it's not until she becomes involved kind of in the play that he's looking at that he starts to become more emotionally or immediately interested in her, when he really starts to love her. Yeah. When she's getting involved and not being completely perfect. So I think it does make sense, but it takes so long for him to respond to her that I think that's what kind of people are getting at, and I agree with that. It really takes a long time of him sort of keeping her at arm's length, which doesn't entirely make sense from a psychological point of view. Right. Makes total sense from the point of view of the movie, though.
Yeah. I mean, if you're interested in seeing Grace Kelly opposite another Hitchcock leading man, go watch To Catch a Thief, because then she's opposite Cary Grant, who again, she's throwing herself at him and he's like, ugh. So what? I don't know what's wrong with these men, but there's a little bit more on the same page there. But the point that you make about the costumes, Hitchcock was a total control freak, came to dressing his leading ladies in movies. And if you watch the movie again with an eye to the costumes, everyone is just about in one costume, more or less, variations on one costume the entire movie. Help the audience keep track of who was who across the way. Right. You would see just you know, Miss Lonely Hearts is in green a lot, and all of these different characters are often appearing in the exact same thing. Jimmy Stewart is in like one style of pajamas the entire film. Thelma Ritter's in one style of house dress, but it's Grace Kelly who gets the costumes, and she gets to be in all of these different iterations. And often in Hitchcock movies, when you watch, the way that the costume colors change, the way that the styles change, is saying something about the story as it progresses. And he loved dressing Grace Kelly. Who wouldn't? But he really did.
Daniel.
Yeah, I was just trying to just if I could ask you, Hannah, about his relationship with David O. Selznick. I guess I just wanted to learn a little more. As I guess I'll look it up later, but I was just kind of curious as far as there's a comment about, I guess, the names of the women in the different Miss Lonely Hearts and Miss Torso, kind of that. And yeah, I guess I just figured you could speak to that a little bit. If you could.
Yeah, I should also say that in North by Northwest, if you've seen that movie, it's another dig at Selznick when Cary Grant's character is Roger O. Thornhill. And he says, "What, you know?" She says, "What does the O stand for?" He says, "Nothing. It's just, you know, a way of making your name fancier." David O. Selznick. It's another direct jab at Selznick. Selznick, in a nutshell, because I know that we're coming up on the hour. The bottom line is that Selznick was as interested in controlling every aspect of a production as Hitchcock was, and that kind of two like-minded, you know, type A filmmakers did not play out well. And so in the earliest movies like Rebecca, Hitchcock didn't feel like those were really his films. He felt like they were more Selznick's films. And there was just resentment that built as their relationship. In some ways they had a very, very good creative partnership, and in other ways they really butted heads.
Gotcha. Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
As Hannah mentioned, we are coming up on the hour, but this has been a really lively conversation and a really insightful one. Lots of new facts and ways to look at this film. I think we have time for one more question or comment, if anyone has anything, and we can bring this to a close. Anyone? Jeffrey.
I missed it possibly, but did Hitchcock make his signature walk on in this film as well?
He did. Who caught it? Yes, he is the butler, I guess, of the songwriter. He's, you know, a housekeeper of sorts. He's polishing a picture frame, I think, or a clock, and he turns and looks briefly in those big, beautiful windows. I mentioned this, I think, in January, but as Hitchcock's career progressed, audiences came to look for him in his movies. So increasingly, his cameos came at the start of a movie so that audiences could stop looking and it wouldn't disrupt the story or the illusion, and they wouldn't take them out of the picture. He could get it over with. Yeah, so it comes pretty early on.
Thank you.
Winding the clock. Yes, thank you. Winding the clock.
Well, I want to thank you all again for joining us tonight. And thank you, Hannah, so much for leading us through this and picking such a great film. Is there anything you'd like to say in closing, or anything further to tee up our next title?
Just to say that this was, as I said, Grace Kelly very much at this middle of her career, which was a very short movie career, and High Society will be the last movie she made. So stay tuned, and we'll come back to her. And definitely check out in August, every day on Turner Classic Movies is a different star, a great way to do a deep dive into their body of work. And there is a great lineup. So I'll see you next month, August 10th.